stinks of the Watergate scandal. Way back in
Oh,
Nixon's time.
well, we've had corruption in government before.
Yes. So there's.
In fact, I'm not sure we've ever not had corruption
Been
in
real
government.
fishy, you know, from both sides of the aisle. You know, like,
Well, so, the two questions I asked, one was, I'm supposing some other folks will come. I haven't had any emails saying they were sick or anything. However, I'll try to do my recording for anyone that wants to watch the class in absentia, which is Latin for not being here, I guess. Everyone knows that. But so the first one, odd question, I forget why it came up. I remember. I remember because now that I said I don't remember, it sparked my memory.
give it a kickstart.
I was talking about the number system because I think I mentioned Greek. You know how if we look at the Greek numbers, how the Greek numbers work. They're not numbers; they're the letters. They use them in alphabetical order, which doesn't match current alphabetical Greek order because they had letters back then that they don't have anymore. But so I can't my Greek is, when I read it, I often even get letters mixed up, which makes me have puzzlement over what exactly is that. I can blame that on Russian, because Russian, is približitelně нет cigarov, which is Russian for close but no cigar.
Upside down and backwards letters.
Очень старая русская фраза, old Russian phrase. Remember, they had Cuba, so they're into cigars. So it occurs to me, I always wonder, is Greek, the Greek number system back then, obviously today they use the same number system all Europeans do, but back then, would we have thought of their Greek system as I always want to call it a decimal system, but I guess a better way of phrasing it is base 10, right? So, do you count up to 10 and then it all repeats again? Which actually means it's really just 9, because when you get to 10, you're at 1, 0. So you
start repeating.
Right? And they obviously couldn't have done that because they didn't have 0. That's kind of fun. But so, and then it dawns on me, hey, if you guys haven't read Isaac Asimov's book on numbers, which, I don't know, do you remember Isaac Asimov?
Yeah.
I don't know who so this is probably not the book itself, but a paper on Asimov's book by someone from India named Gupta. No, that's actually, looks like he scanned a copy of the book. So that's pretty interesting. But he talks about all different kinds of number systems. So the ancients had all different kinds of number systems. And the oddest one that had the most impact on us was the Babylonians, who had base 60. So before you reached the repetition of your numbers, you had to get all the way up to 59, right? And then you start again. So that's pretty interesting. And as a result of that, we end up with our calendar. These are the ones that came closest to approximating the calendar correctly. I mean, the Egyptians had a calendar, it was not very good. And of course, even the Babylonian calendar wasn't that good, so of course it's been improved over the years. Now we're at the point where we have to adjust our year every for 4 seconds or something, something. Have any of you been to Greenwich? No? You know where Greenwich is?
England.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's where Queen Elizabeth I had her palace. It was just down the hill from like the newly instituted meridian, I guess, 0. So if you look at a picture of Greenwich, stuck. If you could see it from up above. So straight down the middle here is the meridian. So that's 0. 0, 0, 0, 0, or whatever, right? So, in the lines of longitude. Always get those two mixed up. Latitude is obviously longitude. I have to think that. But so if you follow this straight on up the hill, sitting right up on top is meridian. What's it called? The tower? Not the tower. Museum? It's not really a museum. So yeah, this is so right here, like you could stand with 1 foot on each side of this if you want to, so that you're straddling
Like that guy's
the
doing.
prime meridian. Well, he's over there.
Well, I was
You
talking.
actually can see this is actually the line. So you can the reason I know is because I went there with my Oculus Rift, and a lot of people took pictures of themselves in 360 standing on the line. So when you're looking at the image in your den, you look down and you see your feet are on each side of this, because you're in exactly where they took the pictures. So I've been there, which is kind of neat. So yeah, the numbers are, but if you think about it, all of these are in minutes, seconds, minutes, degrees. Well, the degrees are hours, right? Which makes the entire globe like a clock, so that as you go down the hours, right, you end up with like wherever you are in the world, you can figure out if the sun is exactly overhead, that's noon for you, right? But everyone else then, we've made this whole thing up relatively late, actually. It was the railroads that really forced us to have time zones and stuff, because you could actually have to figure out, well, what time is it here, what time would it be here. You have to have the schedule. So they had to figure it out, but it's still on the Babylonian system. So that's kind of impressive that, if we have 360 degrees, that's Babylonian, because it's 60, 66, right? So, and the hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, it's all Babylonian base 60. So that's kind of intriguing. So that's why I asked, how many months do we have? Because the Babylonians were the ones that basically came up with 12 months. But as one of you mentioned, yes, the Romans decided to name July after Julius, and Augustus became August, and I don't know who else got months. Well, I don't know. I think the gods got some. Is Juno something like?
Juno is like the Roman equivalent to Zeus.
Yeah. Is he January or what?
June, maybe?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. Yeah, it sounds closer. Yeah. And of course we get the days too. So, but I don't know where the days ended up from, because those seem to mostly end up being the German gods, right? Freitag, right? Friday, Freya's day. Freya's the one with the apples. But Saturn, I guess, is Saturday. So I don't know where those folks come from. But that's why I asked that. I think it's interesting. Most people, of course, we live in this culture. We have all this stuff that's just, it's Saturday. Today's Friday. We don't even think about where the cultural tradition came from that gave us Friday, or why it's 6:15 here instead of what it is in Hawaii or Japan. It's tomorrow, which is very confusing. It makes me wonder, if you were in Japan and you robbed the bank and then you quick flew here and spent the whole day here, would you have an alibi? I spent the whole day in Anchorage,
Well, I haven't robbed the bank, but I have done that. I have arrived in Anchorage 2 hours before I left.
Before you left. Yes.
On the same day.
So that's all fine. And the second quiz question that I asked then was, what did you think of the analogy or the allegory? I get allegory and analogy. What's the difference between allegory and analogy?
Analogy is like you analyze it. The allegory is more like a story, lesson to be learned.
Well, and analogy strikes me as a Greek word, right? A-N-A means to repeat. So N-A-A-N-A is the Greek prefix that in Latin would be R-E. So it's like a repeat. And logos is the pattern. So it's the same pattern again. But allegory, where do we get that?
I think an analogy compares two things, where an allegory tells a story.
That's what John said. But it strikes me too that allegory is Latin, whereas analogy is Greek. But it is a story. So in a way it's both, because it's an allegory that gives us an analogy. Just to confuse the heck out of us, right? Because it's the educational experience, that you learn something new, that the others that haven't had the educational opportunity don't know. You come back and you tell them, and they think you're stupid because none of the rest of them agree with you. It's kind of interesting. There's kind of a tradition that says that people that get college become liberal, and the Republicans hate that, right? It's not true, of course. There's a lot of people that get higher education and become Republicans. You know. But I think it's interesting because if you think of liberals as essentially thinking in terms of more people, right? So instead of being tribal, they're thinking national, or instead of being national, they're thinking international. Because they've learned that other people that don't necessarily think the way they do, or dress the way they do, or look the way they do, are people too. Whereas others that are not familiar with those folks think we should kill them whenever we see them. And so that actually makes pretty clear sense to me that, you know, the more of a liberal education you get, the less conservative you might be. You know, because conservative we think of as protecting the self from the outer, from the other, whereas liberals you think of embracing the other, right? And of course, when we look at how politics changes, you know, depending on whether the situation is healthy or things are falling apart, and everybody kind of reacts. You know, we should be more conservative right now because the stock market's going down, or you know, everything looks like it's going great with the economy. Let's go out and buy a new car. You know, does that make sense? Is that kind of an interesting thing? Of course, it's politically incorrect to, you know, as a liberal, and by the way, I'm neutral. I try to be. Right? So you know, as a liberal, you look at it, and it's politically incorrect to admit that yes, the more college you get, the more liberal you become, because they want the Republicans to send their children to college, because they want to convert them to liberals so that we don't have Republicans anymore. But you know, if the Republicans know that, they're going to be like, don't tell them. But you do have lots of really interesting, educated folks that are very conservative too. It strikes me as David Brooks is one of those. And he writes, what, every third day or something for the New York Times. And reading this last night. See if I can find the paragraph I was thinking of sharing with everyone. So he's coining the phrase amphibians here because they're the new young people that he meets he teaches at Yale. They're people that are from all sorts of different places, so they're in that sense very aware of people from other cultures and so on. Like if you grew up in war-torn Syria and wound up at a community college in Ohio, you're almost bound to be magnetic and original because you've got so much different experiences. But so, let's see if I can find. So, oh, here it is. So, recentering. Amphibians. So the folks that he's talking about that are young people that have lots of experiences and then can go out and be very diplomatic. So he calls them amphibians. They spend their lives creating centering syntheses. They understand from experience that the only way you can bring different groups together is by uniting them at a higher level. That educational level, right? As you go up the allegory, you know, that's also associated with the higher level, right? So the more you learn, the higher your point of view. So it would be great if, having found a way to create a narrative, and so that's uses, of course, that's our contemporary way of talking about it, is that we use narratives. We're in a particular narrative. We conceive of a meta-narrative that we live our life by. Embedded in the meta-narrative are the axioms that we think of as our values, our highest value being God, or whatever you call it, right, etc. So it would be great if, having found a way to create a narrative and a cohering ideal to unify their personal internal diversity, they could do the same for the nation. So if they're capable of having been, from the Midwest and then going to school at Yale, where he teaches, they kind of were enabled to kind of merge those two different kinds of cultural backgrounds and reach a higher level because they can understand both, right? Well, if they can do that for themselves, then they ought to be able to help do that for the nation. Imagine if you could actually go to Israel and Palestine and get those two parties to have some kind of a peace agreement. Can you imagine? That would be like the ultimate, practically speaking. I thought that it was interesting. The Taliban wrote us a letter the other day. Us? I don't know. And they said, why don't you just go home? You're not helping anybody. You're just killing people. And then we have to kill people. It'd be better if you just left. We should write a letter back. It would be better if you just left this earth, But, well, that's probably politically incorrect, depending on your point of view.
Politics is politically incorrect.
So tonight,
I don't think they can meet our terms.
yeah, well, what we'd have to do is send them to Yale,
Yes.
which would change the dress code there, But so tonight we're switching from Plato now to Aristotle, and there's an awful lot of interesting arguments over his early works. By the way, there were works by Aristotle that were lost, as far as they know. I know people ask me, can we use Wikipedia as references in our papers and stuff? I use Wikipedia. It's like the first one that comes up, and basically it all seems good. Plus, if it says something that I don't agree with, I have no hesitation of saying I don't agree with that, because it's Wikipedia. You can get away with it. It's pretty easy. But so Aristotle's considered to have written dialogues that were supposed to be even more beautiful than Plato's dialogues, but all those dialogues are lost. It'd be great if some Egyptian tomb turns out to have like the lost works of Aristotle someday. I could just see, some mummy, being wrapped in, his rhetoric dialogue or something, and it would be great. But it's also the case that some of his early works are considered to be similar to Plato's works. But remember, I argued as we read through like the Parmenides, you find that Plato's self-critiquing, that his theory of the ideas is not holding up under scrutiny to Plato himself. And so it seems like he's realizing that his theory of idealism, how we know things, isn't really working out. And clearly Aristotle had spent, like the last 20 years with Plato as a teacher. About 20 years overlapped. So Plato and Aristotle are dealing with the same issues, but they're going to give us different answers. But it seems to me that probably a time machine will take us back and enable us to find out that in the last years of Plato's life, he was probably encouraging Aristotle, with his new ideas, his new answers. Even though today we look at them and we say, okay, so here's Plato on the one side and Aristotle on the other, and all of philosophy ever since has been kind of a dialogue between the two sides. We can still say that, that's still true, but what we're really looking at is the middle period of Plato. That's where the idealism is essentially ensconced, theoretically. And so when we're looking at Aristotle, there's clearly an advance. There's no doubt about it that Aristotle is going to give us a lot of progress compared to his teacher. He's nice about it. He says, we love those who love the ideas, and that's Plato, right? But they're wrong. That's the nice way to say it, right? And so what's wrong about it? Well, some basics on Aristotle. That's the way he looked when he was born.
The powdered
I mean, actually, if I go to Facebook pages, I've looked up Aristotle on Facebook and he's not there. Actually, he is, but I'm sure it's my one. Photos of me. Do you mind if I show you a picture of me in the nude? Where is it? Maybe Facebook removed it because, it's... I don't know. That's... Obviously, you can tell that's me. That's Photoshop, right? What happened to... That's my dad here, not Chris. I don't know. That's my Aunt Elsie and Uncle Joe. That's the same two people. I don't know what happened to my nude shot. That's me as Santa. That's me. It looks like Santa, but it's actually me. I don't know what happened to. Somewhere in the sets of pictures of me, I have a picture of me in the nude. But I'm just an infant, so it's okay. So when I joke about Aristotle, and you've got this ugly bust of Aristotle, and I say, that's him when he was born, obviously that's a joke. But if you think about it, he didn't look that way all the time. So when you see a bust of Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, number one, who alive when they carved that bust knew what Socrates or Plato looked like? Probably no one. Probably not an actual bust by someone who actually saw the person. So it's probably just symbolic. However, there's descriptions of them, but who knows? But, so it's a Roman copy in marble of a Greek bronze by Lysippus. 330 BC, if that's where it came from, that could be an actual impression of what he looked like at the time. So that's pretty neat. But he was born in stagira, right? Which doesn't work on the screen. Which is in Greece, but near Macedonia. And his father and mother were both physicians, which, of course, doesn't mean they had a medical degree from Harvard or anything of that sort. So I'm not sure what it means to be a physician at that time, right?
Practice, just practice.
But they knew herbal things, you know, I'm sure they probably could stitch up wounds and stuff. But they were good enough that his father was the doctor and counselor for Philip of Macedonia. Philip, by the way, means lover of horses. Philosophy, hippa, right? Remember, hippopotamus is a horse that's in the water. A horse, a hippo, right? It's
Where do you mean?
hippodrome, you know, right? The racetrack or whatever, right? So Philip is a lover of horses. He was a horseman, king of the Macedonians, and father of Alexandros, who, that means the savior of men. Right? Andropos, right? Men. Alex means savior. So that's going to be important because when Alexander the Great grows up as a teenager, Aristotle will be the one who's his tutor. So we get Socrates teaches Plato, Plato teaches Aristotle, and Aristotle teaches Alexander. So you get this interesting foursome there. Although Aristotle only had 2 years with Alexander and Aristotle is only 2 years, and that's because Philip was assassinated on the verge of attacking Asia with his army, Persia, and since he was assassinated in the hopes that they wouldn't attack, obviously, Alexander took over the reins of the army and famously conquered the world, as you probably all know. At least the known world. He got as far as Afghanistan. And the Taliban wouldn't let him go any further. No. Actually, the mountains were the problem there. He cried because there were no more lands to conquer. He didn't look on the other side of the mountain. I don't know how that happened. Too high, I suppose. Nepal, I don't know exactly where they went. So that's pretty cool. But Aristotle's father dies while he's relatively young. I believe the mother died too, I forget. But in any case, the uncle sends Aristotle to Plato, to the academy in Athens, in order to be a student. And so he spends 20 years studying with Plato. So that's kind of all we really know about that. They called Aristotle a bookworm. Always had his head in a book, which is an odd thing because it's not like they had pulp fiction or anything of that sort. You know, what kind of books are we talking about? Obviously not bound books that are printed. They're obviously handwritten, scroll-like things, obviously, all that sort of thing. However, if you think his parents being what they were, and he growing up with them, his interest in knowledge is going to be very different than Plato's. Plato was raised to be a rhetor, to win arguments, a rhetorician, right? To win speeches, be a politician and rule. He got screwed it up. He was on the wrong side practically. He never really became much of a politician. He was at Socrates' trial, one of the ones voting. I'm pretty sure he voted for Socrates, not but it was a secret vote, so who knows? However, remember when Socrates was killed, Plato fled, lest that Athens might try killing him. Aristotle is going to, at one point, flee from Athens also, and famously said, lest Athens sin twice against philosophy, because they had killed Socrates, so he didn't want them sinning twice against philosophy. Obviously thought of himself as a great philosopher. Which, by the way, his name, Aristoi, means best, and telos is design or purpose. So literally, his name means the best design, or best purpose, or best order, if you think of it, right? And again, that strikes me as exactly what he's famous for. His philosophy is like the best organized collection of knowledge for roughly 2,000 years, not quite 2,000. But we still use basically all of it, except for where we refined it because it was, well, incomplete, basically. Right? But he is going to invent sciences. It's frustrating I couldn't find the picture of me as a baby. That would have been funny. However, what I want this is the same site that I'm using, by the way, that I'm linking to. But so these are works by Aristotle, the Athenian Constitution, which I believe they've never used. The categories, which we're going to go over momentarily. On dreams, so he's analyzing dreams, what they mean, how you can interpret them, why we have them, things of that sort. On the gait of animals, how different animals walk. Yeah, exactly. As I said that, sorry to point this out, but you yawned. It's late. It's Friday. Who the heck goes to a class like this on Friday night? I'll try to. I was going to try to have a picture of me in the nude. I thought that would wake everybody up, but no, couldn't find it. But so, who the heck writes? That's frustrating. And there's no way I can move that over either. Did that help at all?
No.
No, of course not. Murphy's Law, which Aristotle wrote. No, I'm just kidding. If he did, he'd have Murphy's Law 1, Murphy's Law 2, Murphy's Law 3, Murphy's Law reversed. He's that kind of guy, right? So on the gait of animals, some of them walk like this, some of them walk like, can you imagine, right? How big a step do they take? You get Plato? Not going to do that. You get the idea? They're two totally different. Totally, right? On generation and corruption, birth and death, kind of growth and death, right? On the heavens, so astronomy, not astrology, but this is on how the heavens move, right? By the way, I love Stephen Jay Gould's book where he talks about science gets how the heavens go, religion gets how to go to heaven. Right? Science get the ages of rocks, whereas religion gets the rock of ages. true, you know. Stephen Jay Gould, great author. He died, I think, 65, too young. But so on the heavens, the history of animals. Let's take a look at book 1. Just to give you an idea of how boring this guy, how interesting this guy is. Right? On the parts of animals, some are simple, to wit, all fascinating English, wouldn't you say? Obviously, these are translated from the Greek, but all such as divide into parts, uniform with themselves, as flesh into flesh. Others are composite, such as divide into parts, not uniform with themselves, as for instance, the hand does not divide into hands, nor the face into faces. You only get one of face, right? So, but you can have lots of pieces of flesh, I suppose. But let's not do that. So very pedantic, it's a good word for that. On interpretation, and we'll talk a little bit about this too, and you think, what the heck is that about? It's like grammar, adverbs, adjectives, nouns, predicates. What are they? Longevity, how to live a long life, or how to screw yourself up, is clearly against marijuana and cocaine. No, he doesn't say that. But he does have an interesting thing to say about wine. He says that pregnant women who drink a lot of wine end up with really weird kids. So there was this, understanding that alcohol and pregnancy doesn't mix that far back. Have we learned our lesson? No. My mother's doctor told her when she would have troubled nights with me to have a glass of wine, because then I would fall asleep easier and she wouldn't be, So if you wonder why I'm so weird, there's another reason why that could be. On memory and reminiscence. I don't remember what reminiscence means. Metaphysics, we'll talk about that tonight also. And by the way, this was not named by him. Physis means nature, but metaphysis is that which follows nature. So that title actually was given to the books that are in this later by someone else. And that's where we get the concept of metaphysics. So even though it's traced, all the subjects in metaphysics are traced to Aristotle, and of course even back through Plato and everything, but they're not especially invented as metaphysics by Aristotle. It was just luck, right, how that happened. Meteorology, weather, right? On the motion of animals, it seems like it ought to be very similar to the gait of animals, but there are other kinds of motions that animals make. How they turn their heads, maybe. The Nicomachean Ethics we'll do next week, right? Are you sure? And that's his main ethics book, which we still use in schools today as a great way of talking about ethics, a beginning, at least, of ethics. On the parts of animals, nature, physics, poetics. Part of it is lost famously. We only have the part that talks about tragedy. Politics, the nature of government, that's his Politeia, his republic. Analysis. This is so the posterior analytics is really logic. There are 3 books that together form what's called the organon, or the tool, and that includes the analytics, both of them, the prior and posterior, and I think interpretation is the other one. On prophesying by dreams, rhetoric, how to tell great speeches, on sense and the sensible, on sleep and sleeplessness, on sophistical by the way, one of his recommendations is if you have trouble falling asleep, read my books. On the soul, which in Latin is anima, where we get animal from. Topics, virtues and vices, on youth and old age, on life and death, and on breathing. So you get the idea that he covered lots of interesting things. So he was one of the teachers at the academy when Plato died, and he hoped to become the head of the academy, but the council decided that Plato's nephew Speusippus would become the next head of the academy, and Aristotle was upset and left. He went to the Isle of Lesbos, where he lived for a few years, became married, had a family, and eventually died. Oh, no, wait. No, he came back. Because remember, he ended up teaching Alexander, and he came back and started his own school just down the street from the academy, which is called the Lyceum, because it was in the temple of Apollo Lyceus. And he had his school there, which was referred to as the peripatetic school, which means you're walking around, because he didn't like to just sit. Can you imagine? Everybody's all walking around. By the way, there's a famous scene at one point. He, being the kind of person he was, he defined everything, and he defined being human as a featherless biped. So we have 2 feet, and we don't have feathers. One of his students made a joke and plucked a chicken and threw it over the wall right in front of him while he was walking along. So a featherless biped. Imagine. Funny stories. While Alexander was out conquering the world, by the way, Alexander had 4,000 men whose job it was to constantly go back and forth between wherever Alexander was and Aristotle, bringing his teacher stuff he thought Aristotle would be interested in cataloging. So I'm not exactly sure what sort of things came back, but we think of Aristotle as the father of zoology, which is animals, the father of biology, which is the study of plants and everything, the father of logic. I'm not sure what else, but those are pretty cool, things to be considered the father of. And how does that all work? As you recall, Alexander the Great dies at 33. He's fairly young. He succeeded in conquering the world, was wounded in India, probably never really recovered from it, ended up getting back to his palace, which he had burned when he conquered it, and realized, why on earth did I burn it down? It's mine. He could have been living in a palace. Instead it was, a burned out hulk because he had destroyed it. Why in the heck did he do that? But in any case, that's where he died of illness, probably from his wounds. Some think he was poisoned, and in fact, some think that Aristotle had something to do with it, which is just crazy. There was like a chief advisor who was Aristotle's student who was there. They killed him because they thought he might have poisoned him. But you know what? They're giving him medicine, I'm sure, to try to save him, not to kill him. Nobody wanted to kill him. That would be crazy. But of course he died anyway. And so they killed the doctor, why not, And, they probably sent a hit squad after Aristotle too. But in any case, Aristotle fled. That's when he ended up back in Lesbos, where he ended up then staying till he died a few years later. He died at 68 years old. I think the reason he died was I think he drowned in the sea where he was out trying to gather specimens while wearing a lot of bling. Because, it was in the jewelry. So I could just picture, all the bling and, that was probably you didn't have a snorkel, so you didn't have snorkels back then. So that's just a kind of hilarious summary of his life as I know it. Probably read lots more about him. I'm sure he's fascinating. But now let's talk about his theory of knowledge, because Plato's theory of ideas, the idealism that we get, is based, of course, on the idea that the real things are not of this world, but are of what we might call heaven, right? And that the soul knows these things because the soul is like the ideas itself, being non-material. And so our soul has this connection to the ideas, so we just know them, right? But we're kind of confined to this physical body, and while we're in the body, we can't quite know things the way we would, again, once we're released from this mortal coil, or, prison house of the soul, whatever you want, all sorts of wonderful Platonic metaphors about how horrible it is being this, when the true nature of our humanity is, of course, the indivisible, immaterial soul, right? And Western culture is not the only one that thinks that way. I think I mentioned Buddhism, and it has that same kind of way of thinking about it. I'm not sure how you could interpret Confucianism in that way, but I know there's a lot of similarities with Confucius. So about the same time, there's all sorts of kind of revolts against material. In all of the major cultures at the time, they had gotten to the point where the priesthood was all about how to enjoy life to the most, how to get the most out of it, how to cooperate with nature, all the powers, in the world, how to get along with them was kind of weird stuff, right? Rituals and things. But it was all focused on being successful, procreating, having lots of wealth, having lots of physical happiness, and so on. But all about the same time, both Socrates, Master Kung, Confucius, and the Buddha all kind of rebel against that. So that's kind of interesting. And so Platonism is essentially a theory of knowledge built on the rejection of the material world, saying that all the true beauty and honor and everything else are invisible abstractions, like in mathematics, for example, right? Aristotle comes along and feels that this theory of knowledge is bunk. And that's his main argument. It's that's bunk. None of that's true. First off, everything that exists has to have substance. Everything has to have substance. If it doesn't have substance, it doesn't exist. That's what existing is, having substance. So the idea that true beauty is not of this world is nonsense, because it doesn't have substance. Where is it? If it's not of substance, it doesn't exist. Right? Same thing with everything else, right? So all these classic Platonic ideas, which are abstractions, aren't real. The only things that exist are things that actually have substance. Remember, Plato thought they're not real because they're constantly going through change. They're corruption. It's corrupting. But as far as Aristotle's concerned, it's nonsense. Substance is a mandatory characteristic of all things. It's a category that all things share. And if it doesn't have substance, so if it's a unicorn, they don't exist. The wine bottle that's on that table, there is none, right? So it doesn't exist, etc. Right? Besides that, so substance, essence, I'm not sure that I would have put that there, because I would add essentia as a Latin version of substance later. But let's just, so substance is the thisness, what it is. Or, as they say, ousia tode tt esti. I don't know what the hell that is, but there you go. That's kind of fun. Ousia, the big argument over the nature of Jesus in the Council of Nicaea is over whether he is one substance with the Father or a separate substance. So the word they used was homoousia, one substance, or homoousia, right? And the answer, if you're Orthodox, is homoousia, not ousia. That would be that Jesus and God are separate, right? That's unorthodox. If you believe that, you're Mormon. True, I think, actually, which is the main reason why they're that's heterodox, right? Heretical. It's also the reason why they have the expression, there was not one iota of difference, right? Because the difference between homoousia and iota ousia, right, is one iota, right? And that was a big enough difference back then to kill people over, right? Right? But if you're arguing over something that doesn't even have one iota of difference, see, it's not worth killing them, because there's not even one iota of difference. That's just fun. True, though. You can look that up. I'm pretty sure I haven't forgotten all the particulars on that. Sorry I'm getting old, but that's the way it goes. So, besides substance, everything also has quantity. It's numbered. It's 1, 2 hands, 2 cups, 1 computer, 1 map, 2 maps, 1 poster. Everything has number. And it also has quality. And quality is yes or no, or negative or affirmative, right? And everything also has relations to other things, higher, lower, warmer, colder, etc. Right? So it's related to what sort, how much, right? Then we break them up further into 10. So some of these were some of the 4 that are there, so substance already, quantity, quality, and relation. But everything also must be someplace. So it has a position, a place, right? It also must exist in time. When? When is it? It also has a position in the sense of, is it sitting, is it lying, is it flying? Is it driving? Right? You know, that's a different kind of position than where it is. A state of habitus, boy, that's pretty poor to say that. Is it clothed? Is it armed? Does it have an AR-15? Is it entering the school? You know, sorry about that. That's always going to be in our minds for what, a month or so. Action. Is it doing something? Studying, sleeping, dancing, whatever. And affection is how is it being affected by some other object, if it's passive. That's it. So here you have the chart, you know, of these basic, so 10. So he has 10 categories that everything has. So if you're trying to have knowledge of anything, you're going to at least have these 10 characteristics that you can describe about the thing as you're trying to find out about it, right? So that's pretty cool. The Germans, oddly enough, will use them over again. Actually, everybody keeps these as they know them, all the way down to the Enlightenment. And in the Enlightenment, the odd thing that Kant does is he adds 2 more. So he ends up with 12 categories instead of 10. So that's kind of odd. There are others, though, besides these. There ought to be a potentiality and actuality there. I'm not sure, that might be associated with this. So like if you have the potential to be a race car driver, but you've not had the opportunity, but then the day comes when you get to become one, you know, and you're out there driving on the track. Now you're actually a race car driver, whereas before you only had the potential to do that. And that will get involved with other things like the ball on the top of the Tower of Pisa has the potential to fall and clunk somebody on the head, you know, or the apple has the potential to fall and annoy Sir Isaac Newton, you know, or whatever, right? So potentiality, etc. But say we have a dish. Isn't that exciting? A dish. I have a dish. So I can have a category of things called dishes, right? I thought hard about how I would go do this, so I hope this is going to be exciting, right? We call them what? Nouns or collective nouns, right? And it goes through all the parts of speech, as you can imagine, which I'd be curious of actually knowing enough Greek to look at it and see if the parts of speech in Greek are amazingly similar to what our contemporary parts of speech are. I mean, you can invent new words, like lightsaber, yes? Or Jedi Knight. Or, what's the new one? Black Panther. What's the name of the metal that they find in the mountain that enables them to build the special suits that they can become so powerful in? Has anybody seen the movie yet? No? Shoot. I'm wondering if I should see the movie or it just upset me.
Heard nothing but good things so far.
It's supposed to be the best Marvel movie they've ever made so far. Pretty interesting. Have you heard about the movie? Maybe. Do we have time? Can we catch? Should we go and watch it at the? No. I'd have to pay, and that would probably no. That would would be more money than Donna gets, I think. So we can make up new words, but, and here's my quiz question for the first part of the class. Can you make up new grammar? One M or two?
I don't know.
You're making it up.
Two. It's gotta be two.
Gotta be
Everyone
two?
Great. Yeah, I assume it sucks a person, so I don't know.
I used to could spell, but I think Russian totally destroyed it. Can you make up new grammar? Yes?
Yes.
Such as?
Well, we created grammar to begin with, why couldn't we create more?
Good question. And I'm thinking German, you know, if I go from German to English, somewhere along, English is supposed to be a Germanic language, although 80% of our vocabulary is supposed to be French, because the Normans beat the crap out of the Saxons.
And theirs is based off of Latin.
Yeah, yeah. So no wonder we're so confused,
Exactly.
right? But do the Germans really have different grammar? I mean, their structural elements are somewhat different, but they still have verbs, adverbs, adjectives, nouns.
Like, can you create a new type of word? Not necessarily a descriptive word or a word labeling something, but is there such thing as creating a new
Grammar.
type of word?
Yeah. New. I mean, I can have a new noun that's totally been invented by me, a lightsaber, which physically cannot possibly exist. You know, not like. And if you had one and I had one and we went, zzz, you know, light, you would just go. There would be no. You know, plus the whole sound effect, zzz, zzz, you know, and I love Obi-Wan Kenobi as he's dying, you know, it's like, I'm out of battery, or whatever. So yeah, we can create new words, and we do. We even create nuances in the words we have, whatever. Totally, right? I love the way we do that stuff. I told you about the time I was walking along the spine during the summer, and a female student was walking by the other way on her cell phone. Right? And as she walked by me, I heard her say loud enough, you know, that I could hear it, to the person that she was speaking to, "You're such a bad boy." And it sounded so good. Ah, I was so jealous. That was terrible. That should have been funny. Nobody laughed. Did I not do that very well? I guess not. I guess it just doesn't sound that good for me, but if you know, a sexy young lady walking by, you're such a wow. However, can you make up new grammar? So, preverb. Not quite a verb, a preverb. Reverb? We have reverbs. Let's get that in music. But so, I have a dish. And it is a plastic dish. So this particular dish is in the set of things that are made out of plastic. So this dish is plastic. It's also square. So it has a shape. This dish is a plastic square. And the color red. Red plastic square. And it was made in China. So now what I want to do, instead of saying this dish is plastic, or is red, or is square, now I want to change the copula and say that all of this is from China. So notice what I'm doing. These are all categories. Red things, plastic things, square things, things from China. And I don't actually have the dish with me. I should have used something that was like real, but suppose I have a red square plastic dish from China. Shouldn't eat it. You know, it's made out of melanin. Melanin? Melamine. Melamine? Melamine. Right. Melanin is in the skin. Yeah. And by the way, I hear if you take melanin tablets, that does weird things to you. So I'm not going to try that. But you get the idea, right? So say it's true. It's true. That means that what I'm doing is giving you an example of. Is this fascinating how I did that? I thought every one of those out earlier, lying in bed. What example? So all S is P. So each of those was an example of this dish was all of the members of the set, the category of things that I was talking about. So it's all of this dish is red, or all of it is a red square, or all of it is a red square plastic dish, right? From China, right? So when you're looking at my statement and you're trying to figure out is it true or false, you can see that it's true. How do we do it? How do we know that a statement is true? Aristotle invents this, by the way. Didn't have true statements until Aristotle invented it. He invents it in this. All of your statements have to be, if they're going to be true or false, they have to be one of these four types of statements. So that's this one, all SSP. Have you ever heard this stuff before? You have. Because I make people suffer. You've heard this before, right? So no S is P, some S is P, some S is not P. Now I can have other utterances like yippee, which notice is neither true nor false. I can have questions like how old are you, which you don't have to answer that. But notice how old are you is neither true nor false. Questions are not true or false. Exclamations are neither true nor false. Imperatives, shut the door, neither true nor false. For a statement to be true or false, it has to give us information that we can observe to be true or false, right? The wine bottle on this table is Chardonnay. False, there's no wine bottle, right? By the way, we also today we'll call those observation sentences or statements. Right? I'm actually observing it. So if someone down the hall said, "Oh, the wine bottle on table 3 was Chardonnay in that room, right? And everyone got upset. We're not supposed to have wine in here. They're all going to get upset over fake news because it's false, right? So they shouldn't have believed the guy that said that because he didn't have an observation of the actual thing, right? So we start off with observation sentences or statements, right? And they have to be of one of these four forms. No wine bottles on the table. Some magic markers on the table. Some magic markers not on the table. It's over there. Right? So any statement you can make that's either true or false has to fit one of these four types of statement. That would be a fun exercise. Let's take a break. Yes? In case any of us have to pee or not. Right? And while you're taking your break, try to think of true or false statements and if they will fit. Aristotle's ancient square of opposition. Isn't this cool? Never heard this before. Yes? Or you have? Yes. Yes? It's funner when people haven't heard of it. Because then I tell them how this works and they go, how long has this been the case? Since 350 BC.
I'm pretty sure you showed us this in another class, like
Yes.
a couple weeks ago.
Here.
Yes.
Yes. Well, this is where it's supposed to be introduced.
This is a repeat.
This is a repeat?